There is a hospital in Resident Evil 9 that was never built to heal anyone. Deep inside it, one little girl is still waiting to be saved. And somewhere above her, another one is already wandering the halls. That is what makes the girl one of the most disturbing monsters in Resident Evil Requiem. Not just the way she moves, not the white dress, not the way she seems to melt into the building itself, but the quiet possibility that long before she became the thing stalking Grace through Rhodes Hill, she was just a child. A child the hospital used, broke, and threw away. Capcom's official materials place Grace Ashcroft inside the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center and identify Emily as a girl trapped inside that same facility, while post-release file and puzzle material ties the place to human experimentation and a subject named Marie. Grace Ashcroft does not enter Rhodes Hill like a hero. She enters it like prey. That matters, because Resident Evil has given us soldiers, police officers, agents, survivors, people who know how to fight when the nightmare begins. But Grace is different. Officially, she is an FBI intelligence analyst, introverted, deeply shaken by the death of her mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, and pulled into this case through an investigation that leads her straight into Rhodes Hill. And Rhodes Hill does not feel like a place where anyone should be alive. It feels quiet in the wrong way, like every hallway has already seen something terrible and is waiting for it to happen again. The rooms look clinical, but not clean. The lights feel thin. The doors feel heavy. The whole building has that old Resident Evil feeling, where every locked room seems less like a puzzle and more like a warning. And somewhere inside this place, Grace finds a little girl named Emily. Capcom's official character pages identify Emily as a child Grace discovers trapped in the care center, while hands-on guides place Grace's escape through the sprawling east and west wings, attic, basement, and research areas of the facility. Now imagine that image for a second. A frightened woman trapped in an institution, a little girl hidden away inside it, and another girl already lost somewhere in the dark. That is the shape of this story. And that is why the girl works so well, because at first she feels like a ghost story inside a Resident Evil game. Not just an enemy, not just a mutated body, something sadder than that, something unfinished. The game presents her as a stalking presence, moving through the hospital like she belongs to it more than the people inside do. Coverage around the game's reveal and hands-on previews emphasized her childlike form, white clothing, and the way she hunts Grace through the care center with an almost supernatural stillness. And the deeper you go, the more the hospital starts to explain her. Rhodes Hill calls itself a chronic care center, but its files tell a different story. Behind the locked doors and hidden labs, this place is built around blood collection, mutation analysis, and the search for something far beyond treatment. One file explains that the center's experiment has progressed through multiple phases, and another notes that the blockade around the facility was extended to 2040 because obtaining ELPIS remained imperative. Spencer's own research notes describe memory transfer through blood, arguing that blood cells carry information tied to memory, and that a mutated T-virus strain might make it possible to transfer the mind or will of one person into another vessel. That is when the building stops feeling like a hospital and starts feeling like a machine. A machine built to turn people into containers. A machine that sees blood not as life, but as material. A machine that would absolutely look at a child and ask whether they could survive the process. That is where Emily changes everything. Because Emily is not just another survivor hidden inside the story. She is the emotional center of it. Officially, she is a little girl Grace finds in the care center, and the game's hidden final puzzle material later ties her directly to Marie through the phrase, "the sweet pair." GameSpot's post-release guide says the puzzle's intended pair is Emily and Marie, and describes Marie as the girl monster haunting the care center. So now the horror takes on a different shape. Emily is not simply the child in danger. Emily is the child who still exists in a form Grace can save. And if that is true, then the girl becomes something far uglier. The child the system already took. The files are where this turns from eerie to devastating. One of the major Rhodes Hill documents is the Subject 170 record. It states that a 2.3 milliliter sample was extracted from 524.3 liters of blood, collected from 115 infected people, and then administered to Marie, who was registered as Subject 170. The result was increased physical resilience, but the experiment failed to achieve its real goal. Marie became mentally unstable, escaped, and was marked for immediate disposal. That single document changes everything, because now the girl is no longer just a creature in the walls. Now she has a name, Marie. And the game never needs to look directly at the player and say, "This monster is Marie." It is worse than that. It lets you realize it yourself. It lets you put together the image of a child injected with blood, gathered from more than 100 infected bodies. A child who survived the procedure long enough to become useful. A child who lost her mind, escaped the people experimenting on her, and was no longer treated as a patient or even a person, but as waste to be disposed of. That is not just body horror. That is institutional horror. The fear is not only in what Marie becomes, it is in how methodically the hospital writes her off. And that is why Emily matters so much. Because once Marie enters the picture, Emily stops feeling like an isolated victim. She starts to feel like the other half of a broken pair. GameSpot's final puzzle guide says the sweet pair clue refers to Emily and Marie, notes that Emily mentions Marie by name in a cutscene, and describes a photograph in the security chief's office showing the two children together, side by side. The same guide also says Marie imprisoned Emily rather than killing her, suggesting some fragment of recognition or attachment survived Marie's transformation. That idea is what gives this part of Resident Evil 9 its real power. Because suddenly, the chase scenes are not just chases anymore. Now every time the girl appears, the question changes. Is she hunting Grace? Or is she circling the only remaining piece of her old life? If Emily was someone Marie knew before the experiment, then the girl's presence becomes tragic in a completely different way. She is no longer just a failed subject raging through the building. She is a ruined child orbiting the one person she still cannot fully let go of. And then the secret puzzle twists the knife even deeper. To complete the game's hidden final puzzle, players must take Marie's doll, retrieve the severed hand, scan it to reveal a "Let's Play" message, carry Emily to the lead researcher's office, and solve the box so that the sweet pair can hear the voice. The result is a child's laughter. GameSpot's explanation frames this as bringing Emily together with a fragment of Marie's life before she became the monster. That is such a cruel, perfect detail. Not a boss weapon, not a combat weapon, a doll, a child's laugh. A puzzle that only makes emotional sense if the game wants you to remember that before Marie became the girl, she was someone who played. Someone who had toys.
What does Victor want with you?
Someone who had a bond with Emily strong enough to leave an echo behind, even after everything done to her. And this is where Grace finally locks into the story.
Wait, your DSO.
Because Grace is not just there to witness the monster.
The counter-bioterrorism
She is there to
agency,
witness
right?
the difference between what the hospital sees and what a human being
Might need
sees.
it.
Rhodes Hill sees subjects. Victor Gideon
Get
sees
outta here.
research. Spencer's legacy sees vessels. Grace sees children. That is her role in the story. Not to be the strongest person in the room, but the one who still reacts like these things matter.
I'll be fine.
The one who still looks at Emily and sees someone worth carrying out of hell. The one who, by moving through Rhodes Hill, also forces the player to see Marie not just as a monster, but as evidence of what this place really is. Official RE9 materials identify Victor Gideon as the owner of the Wrenwood Hotel and a figure tied to Grace's nightmare, while the Rhodes Hill files directly connect the care centre to Spencer's memory transfer ideas and ongoing experimental phases. That is why I think the girl is one of the saddest monsters in the series. Not because she is the strongest, not because she is the most grotesque, but because she represents a kind of horror Resident Evil has always been circling around. The point where science stops pretending to save people and starts stripping them down into useful parts. And with Marie, that horror lands harder because she is a child. A child fed infected blood. A child who escaped. A child who is no longer called Marie by the people who made her. Only Subject 170. Only a failed result. Only something to be disposed of. Emily, then, becomes more than a second girl in the story. She becomes the proof that Marie once had a life outside the experiment. A friend, a sister, a mirror. However you interpret it, the game's own hidden puzzle and environmental clues push them together again and again. Emily and Marie are framed as a pair, and that means Grace is moving through the wreckage of a relationship the hospital destroyed. So when people ask what the girl really is in Resident Evil 9, I do not think the best answer is a stalker enemy or a failed bioweapon. I think the best answer is this. She is what Rhodes Hill did to a child, and that is much worse. Because monsters in Resident Evil usually begin with a choice someone made in a lab. But this one lingers because the tragedy does not end in the lab. It walks, it waits, it keeps Emily close. It leaves behind dolls, severed pieces, little traces of someone who used to exist. And by the time Grace understands what kind of place she is trapped in, the player already feels it too. This was never just a hospital. It was a place built to take the softest, weakest, most defenseless people imaginable and test whether they could survive being turned into something useful. That is why the girl lingers. That is why this part of Resident Evil Requiem hits harder than a normal monster reveal. And that is why the scariest thing about her is not what she became. It is that somewhere inside the game's files, its puzzles, and its hidden laughter, Resident Evil 9 keeps reminding you that she was once just Marie. And if Grace had arrived too late for Emily, there would have been two of them.